I guess what I want people to know is that it's a very exciting piece, and it's just not your typical opera. I mean, I direct a lot of different genres of opera. I direct Baroque operas, I direct 19th century Romanticism, and what you have with Orphée is a piece that is not only contemporary, so the music sounds 20th century, and we've all heard 20th century music before, but it's also this very strange piece of theater. It feels a little bit like a movie, and indeed it was a movie, which we can talk about, and it feels a little bit like science fiction, which you don't see on the opera stage very often. So you know, when you come to watch Orphée, you have a very different experience from what the experience you have when you come to see Aida or La Traviata, for example. Yeah, I mean, it's just because the maybe science fiction fantasy, the piece takes place in a kind of conventional setting. It's somebody's house, and yet there are these characters who get introduced who are from another world. They're from the underworld. This character she's called La Princesse, the princess, but she's actually deaf, and she has these men in motorcycle suits who follow her around, and so these characters are responsible for transporting people back and forth from one world to another. So we have all of these moments on stage where people are moving from one world to another. So it can get pretty sci-fi-ish at times, you know. And there will be a moment when you're sitting in the audience where you're looking at the stage and you see two motorcyclists, and then you see 5 characters on stage, and then you see 5 more characters on stage who look exactly like them, and you start to think, this is really weird. You know, it feels a little bit like a science fiction movie, you know. Yes. Well, this is a love story, and of course it's based on the myth. You know, I think most of us are familiar with the myth in some form or another. Orphée is an artist whose wife is killed in the original version of the myth. She's bitten by a snake while out in a field, and his grief is so great that he finds a way to go to the underworld and ask for permission to bring her back to Earth, or to the living world, and he's given permission on the condition that he not look at her while he's traveling back to the living world, and he does, and he loses her forever. That's the old story. In this version, Cocteau is using, Jean Cocteau, who made the movie that the opera is based on, is using the myth to talk about some very modern ideas. One of which is a marriage in trouble. So that's not the only thing that the opera is about, but there's a strong theme in the opera about a marriage on the rocks and a midlife crisis. So when we meet the character of Orphée, he is in the middle of a midlife crisis. He's questioning not only his career, which is the career of a poet. He's a well-known, famous poet, but he's also questioning his marriage. And another woman is introduced into the story, the princess, who he falls in love with. Now, you can take that to another level because she also represents his death. So she's a real person on stage that he falls in love with, but he's also falling in love with the idea of his own death. The idea of immortality, the idea of like dying in order to be remembered and to live in fame. So the love story, it's too complicated to say it's a simple love story. However, by the end of the opera, what we realize is that the whole opera is working toward Orphée finding a way back to his actual marriage, to his wife Eurydice. At the end of the opera, everything that's happened to them has been forgotten, and they're back together. Now, we don't know what the future will hold for them. It's a very ambiguous ending. We don't know if they're back together happily, or if their marriage will continue to have the problems it did before the opera started. But what we do know is that the affair that he sort of has during the show is over, and that character is gone. It's great fun, this opera. I mean, it's, you know, again, since I'm doing it for the second time, I'm finding myself sitting in the room, directing, staging the scenes, and revisiting characters who I really have fallen in love with. You know, they're very beautiful, very real, very human characters, and it's something about the music, actually. The music is very unusual because it rather than telling the story in the way that say romantic 19th century music does. If you listen to Puccini, you hear elements of plot going forward in the music. The arrivals of characters are announced through musical themes. Here, what happens with Glass's music is that you end up with this quality of, or you end up with this feeling that the music is creating moods rather than plot. So what you have are these incredibly beautiful musical situations in which the story takes place. And up against that music are characters who are incredibly real and incredibly human. And I have fallen in love with all of them. And the great pleasure of getting to do the show again is getting to revisit these characters and find new things about them. You know, it's so you know, just to sum up, I would just say it's great fun, this opera. It's enormously fun and entertaining, this piece. It's sheer pleasure to watch. I mean, off the record or on, audiences loved this piece 2 years ago. They went crazy for it. I think people felt like they had never seen an opera like this, and they hadn't, you know. And that's, you know, I'll take partial credit, but it's the piece more than anything. You know, we did a wonderful production, and we had a great cast, and we have a marvelous cast this time. But it's also just a fantastic, fascinating opera, you know.